introductions coming in the chat. I love it. Well, good evening, everyone, or good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for our final Hiring Summit workshop. Our spring hiring summit was this past Friday, and it was such an incredible labor of love. And we are hoping to close out our workshop series with some post-interview follow-up mastery and best practices. So my name is Erin Page. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Program Operations here at Girls Who Code. Tonight, we have an incredible lineup of speakers who are very excited to share their tips and tricks for following up with potential employers. So in just a moment, I will introduce you to our panelists. If you do have questions for them, we encourage you all to drop them in the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your window, as we have some time dedicated towards the end for some audience Q&A. So we definitely want to hear from you. This event was designed for you all, and we want you to maximize the time that we have here with our panelists this evening. We want the vibe of our conversation to be casual but informative, and we all are also grateful that you joined us today. Also, please note that closed captioning is enabled. If you would like subtitles, you can click on the live transcript/show subtitles button on the bottom of your window. If you do need support, please post that in the Q&A or in the chat and we can help. And we will definitely support with some of those logistics. But let's introduce our panelists for this evening. So Aaliyah Redmond. Aaliyah is a Deloitte professional with more than 20 years of experience in management consulting, talent acquisition, and career coaching within the professional services industry. Her history at Deloitte includes a wide array of experiences across Deloitte consulting, risk and financial advisory, and talent acquisition. And she is currently leads Deloitte's diversity, equity, and inclusion recruiting efforts, specifically focused on campus recruitment. Outside of work, she enjoys beach travel, outdoor adventures, and relaxing with friends and family. Next up, we have Adrienne Murray Rainey. Adrienne is a Pittsburgh, PA native and Carlow University alum. She currently works at PNC Bank as a senior manager of business technology. As a former digital product manager, Adrienne has a passion for software development and helps teams and individuals grow by way of leading with impact and influence. Outside of work, she nurtures her competitive spirit through her enjoyment as a basketball mom. We have Emily Sperling also on the call. Emily's journey began in the entertainment industry as a casting associate and talent agent. She eventually realized that she wanted to spend time learning and helping others. So she combined her fascination with tech and love for connecting with people to become a technical recruiter. She has since worked at startups and enterprise companies, but her passion is building and ensuring, as Adam Grant says, work that doesn't suck for employees. I love that. Outside of work, you can find Emily at a climbing gym, I call it the jumpy house, or spending time with her kiddos. Zainab Waarhi graduated from university with a bachelor's in computer science with a concentration in data science and AI. During undergrad, Zainab worked with Girls Who Code as a TA, an advisor, and as an alumni, advocating for bridging the gender gap in tech and fostering female digital literacy. She currently works as a software engineer at Deutsche Bank. Outside of work, she enjoys listening, reading, listening to podcasts, reading, and staying physically active. So if we can also in the chat, just thank all of our panelists for the gift of their time today. We are so grateful that you're here with us. And we will head into some of our questions. So many of our students on this call may have had interviews at the Hiring Summit or are actively in their interview process now. And so we're going to focus some of our initial questions on some post-interview etiquette in today's job market. And so my question for our panelists is, how important is post-interview etiquette? And how does it contribute to a candidate's overall impression? And so I'm going to kick us off. Emily, if you can kind of kick us off with just some post-interview etiquette tips.
Absolutely. I have a lot to say here, so everybody else feel free to jump in at any point. But I think that, having good etiquette is very important throughout your entire interview process. And that's not just for the candidate, but for the company as well. That being said, today's focus is on the candidate and the art of follow-up. So I will say, good etiquette stands out. Absolutely. It can help you stand apart and show how you would treat people in your day-to-day job. every single interaction you have with every person at the company really gives the company an idea of the type of person you are and who they're going to be working with in their day-to-day. And at the end of the day, you spend a ton of time at work. You want to make sure that you work at a place that really has a great culture and people highly contribute to that. I have had incredible candidates just ace every single interview, with every single person, but then we find out in the debrief that they treated the recruiting coordinator very poorly. And because of that, the team ended up not moving forward. So what I'll add is that bad etiquette is also memorable and not in a good way. I'm sure you've checked out like a restaurant on Yelp or Google reviews, and the negative comments really do stand out and are hard to forget. I understand that the job market is like very tough. It can be super frustrating to go through so many processes. And sometimes people react. So I would just really focus on trying to keep composed, being true to yourself, and being kind, because kindness goes a long way.
Love that. Thanks, Emily. We're going to touch upon some like post-interview, like thank you notes and communications, but I think that behavioral kind of in the values shown throughout the interview are super important. Adrian, really curious on some etiquette, post-interview etiquette tips from you as well.
Well, Emily's a tough one to follow. She has some great points there. But the post-interview etiquette, it's a very important extension of how you show up. It becomes a additional opportunity to display your personality, because even if it is a potentially a written communication, tone still travels through your written communication, and it does matter. So it's an opportunity to put your personality on display. It also contributes to or can take away from your character attributes. And as Emily mentioned, everyone it's a holistic view of that, whom all you have come in contact with along the way. So, you can interview and feel very extremely confident about how you performed in the interview, but that follow-up is equally as important, and how you handle people through the continuation of those communications.
That's an interesting perspective too. Just, you can nail an interview and get all the right answer or say all the right things and kind of have your pitch really down packed, but the folks, the recruiting, the talent acquisition manager, or whoever along this process, the way that you treat them is equally as important to companies that really kind of care that holistic view.
Yes.
Great. Zainab, would love to also hear some of your perspective on kind of etiquette and contributions to a candidate's overall impression.
I think Emily and Adrian mentioned really great points. Just to add to that, I guess the written statement that you're going to send to the interviewer or to the recruiter will make you stand out. It will make you memorable, so they would remember your name, and it's a great opportunity to thank them and to reiterate your qualifications, remind them of who you are, and give a glimpse of your personality, just like Adrian said. And I think what Emily said, it kind of reminded me of something that it shocked me when I started working. After getting into corporate life, still have a really great relationship with my recruiter, and it would give you a really great advantage on the long run, if you end up getting the job, for example. You will have someone who can still vouch for you if you get promotions. You can have someone who can recommend you to other teams if you want to transition. So having these connections, it will help you move really fast later when you're in this company. So keeping it professional and sending these thank you notes, it can be a very small step, but it has a really huge impact on the long run. So definitely recommend tailoring that into whenever you're interviewing.
And Zainab, we are actually talking a little bit to our second question, and Adrian would love for you to kick us off. Just specifically, like, what are some of the key elements of that thank you note after an email, right? I'm sure we can Google, like, what's a typical thank you note, right, that you send post an interview. So specifically, like, how can candidates really personalize their messages that really will make a long-lasting impact to potential recruiters? So, Adrian, I'll hand it to you. Or Leah, I'm sorry, Leah.
Oh,
You can
yeah,
do
absolutely.
it.
So, yeah, again, I agree with everything that was said prior. And I think the way to think about etiquette in general is that every interaction that you experience before, during, and after your interview is a part of your assessment process. So focusing on professionalism, the quality of your interactions is super important. So getting to the second question, some of the things that are relevant or important from a thank you note perspective, or just general follow-up post-interview. For me, the most important sort of tip, or the most important thing to me when I receive a communication, is that the individual is genuine. So, right. So what are you truly following up for? That can come across very easily in your message, right? So the tone of your message, what you include in your message, the length of your message, all of those things I think are important. So there's no formula here, but I personally, and some of this is personal preference as well, right? So I'm speaking from my personal preference and just my experience with receiving these types of communications. So important to me. Second to being, sort of genuine and obviously having a real reason to follow up. The second would be brevity. So being concise and to the point. You've had, numerous interactions likely prior to that point. So you don't need to sort of resell yourself all over again, or send a long, paragraphs of information trying to, again, sell yourself, because you've had the opportunity to do that. So this is an opportunity to show your appreciation, to be brief, to be positive, and to be genuine. Those are the things that I look for and appreciate in follow-up messages.
Love that, Aaliyah. I was just writing down some of these things. They're very helpful tips too. Just tone, brevity, right? Positive. It's not maybe the time to like resell and kind of list all the bullet points that you might have said verbally.
Right.
Adrian, I did cut you off. I would love to kind of hear from you next on some thank you note tips.
No, you're fine. I would say to, still keep it formal, because it's an opportunity to put your business posture on display. So follow your standard greeting. And as far as your body is concerned, always express appreciation. It's a competitive market. So the fact that you were chosen to interview is something that you want to show appreciation for. You do want to reiterate your value. What is the value in bringing you on to this team and the organization in question? Show gratitude for a piece of information that the interviewer shared, whether it was about them personally, or about the company, its values, etc. But that does show that you were listening, and that you did receive and retain that information. And then, of course, your closing. And so that's, again, keeping with good business posture and a formal response. Similar to what Aaliyah said, it's also important to, you can personalize it by simply being authentic. If there's a quote or a catchphrase that might be important to you or really reflect your values, your thought process as whatever the role may be, that's always a nice touch. And I know I mentioned several things, but being brief, I'll piggyback Aaliyah on that. You do want to be brief, but inclusive of all of those things. Now, what I will add in closing, in the spirit of whom our audience is, in the generation, I would say in the room, but in our virtual room, Chat GPT is very popular. And it can it's very nice. Your output is as good as your input. If you do feel compelled to use it to boost your confidence, it is definitely it definitely becomes more important that you personalize that and add some authenticity to it, because especially if you're in tech, those of us that are familiar with AI also know those familiar AI words that are frequently used in those outputs that you receive. So that's my perspective there.
Yes, no, we talk a lot internally about, AI, the advantages, watch outs, some of the risks, and really
Yeah.
kind of just, educate our students on, being authentic, right? And using it to their advantage, but being mindful of the risks. And so, yeah, thank you for mentioning that,
You're
Adrian.
welcome.
Emily, I'll hand it to you. Just some elements of a craftful thank you note after an interview.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was gonna start it how Adrian ended it, actually. I was gonna say, Aaliyah and Adrian both brought up great points, which is to be genuine and authentic. So you have to really be careful with ChatGPT or any of the other AI tools and make sure that you do personalize it. They hit on a lot of the points that I would hit on, which is keep it short. We don't want it to be a novel. It doesn't have to be one sentence, right? But don't want it to be too long. I would say continue building rapport. At the end of the day, people thrive off connecting with others. Sometimes in the interview, you may learn something about the interviewer, like, I don't know, if you have extra time and they talk about like, oh, my favorite show is How I Met Your Mother. And you're like, oh, well, have you seen How I Met Your Father? And they say no. And the thank you note, maybe you can say, hey, make sure you watch this episode. It's really great, or whatever it is, right? Try to build that connection. And then I would say the third one is after you interview, I understand that sometimes it can be a little scary. Your mind might race, you might say like, oh, I could have answered this better, or I was so wrong when I said that. I think that it could be a really good opportunity to say, hey, I was really thinking about this question, and what I would love to add is X, Y, Z. Again, don't get too long with it, but it's a good opportunity to continue sort of those things as well. So I think that Aaliyah and Adrian hit the rest of what I would say as well, but that's all I really have to add.
I love that. Especially like building off that, the personalized piece too, that may trigger, the recruiter to just remember or just, keep you in the back of their mind. I love that. I'm going to head into my next question because I think maybe Chat GPT might be a common mistake or, part of a pitfall maybe that job seekers now should avoid or just be mindful of when crafting their thank you notes. So I'll start with you, Zainab, on just like any common mistakes or pitfalls that job seekers should avoid maybe when crafting those notes.
I think for me it would be the length. They already touched on the length of the emails. You don't need a whole letter because it would just not be read. That's the straightforward. It won't be read. Corporate life is very busy. People don't have a lot of time to dedicate to that. Just be concise. And I think bullet points or I don't know, you can just have smaller paragraphs, but just be concise and straightforward to the point. And it will be very helpful to just stand out and keep it memorable in the recruiter or the interviewer's memory.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Aaliyah, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'd say, to piggyback here at, kind of the opposite of everything that we, sort of suggested that you do, right? Too long, reliving the interview, sort of not being professional or authentic, et cetera. But in addition to that, I'll just say to another, to the earlier point, sometimes it is a little bit nerve-wracking after an interview is concluded. You want to know, when am I going to hear back? And, have there been any decisions made? And so sometimes you can get anxious and it feels like time is dragging, right, for the candidate. So I would say also be careful about following up too soon or too often, right? So certainly a well-placed, brief, genuine thank you note is appropriate. Beyond that, following up for status updates, I'd be careful about that, right? You want to be very attentive and cognizant as to what the recruiter or hiring manager shares with you pertaining to the process and when you can expect to hear back, and really lean into sort of that guidance when you're determining whether you should follow up or when you should follow up or how often you should follow up. So I'd say just being patient is important as well, and not following up too soon or too often.
That's great. I'm also going to make a plug for Q&A for students. I have maybe one or two more questions, and I would definitely love to hear from y'all. I'm going a little off script just because I love hearing kind of personal anecdotes and stories about maybe, things that you've implemented or strategies. So I'm just really curious to hear from you all, and maybe I'll start with you, Adrienne, on just kind of like a post-interview practice that you really that or successful experience that you've had, or maybe not so good of a one that you've really learned from. I know, hearing from different challenges and experiences are really helpful for our students as well. So just kind of like how it kind of resonates with you and manifests maybe in some of your post-interview processes.
Um, let's see. I've
Peter,
interviewed.
this wasn't part of the script, so no pressure.
No, and I'm thinking because I interviewed last year for the first time in 7 years and actually had the blessing of being hired for the first position I applied
That's
for.
great.
So I'm digging in the archive a bit because it's certainly been a journey, getting to that point. So I would say one thing, if I look back, I think there was a time where I would avoid the follow-up, not the thank you. I would send a thank you. But I would not always rather send in a inquiry for a follow-up to the recruiter. I would just, assume it got, the position was filled, they selected another candidate, or even that the position was withdrawn. So that was actually an extension that I was going to add to Aaliyah's feedback for the previous question, is in keeping with proper etiquette in conducting the follow-up, is to not be afraid, don't be afraid to seek out updates on status of that position, but because that also helps you to get feedback. So I would say, in my experience, that's something that during those times I could have done better, and where I would have gotten feedback, I'm sure it would have helped me with improving my interview etiquette in the additional opportunities to come.
Thank you for sharing and going off script with me.
No problem.
This is a little bit related to a Q&A question from Alicia that we have, just on timing, right? Generally, of like, what's a good time to follow up after an interview? Is it a day? Is it the same day? Is it a few days after? Like, kind of striking that balance between being pushy and, but also kind of giving time for things to settle. So just really curious. And maybe we'll start with you, Emily, just on like, subjectively, like what would be a timing that you think is the nice sweet spot?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, what I would say is to get clarity beforehand. Ask the recruiter, like, hey, when should I anticipate, an answer by? So that way you kind of have an idea, and then they'll give you the answer to that, basically. So if they're like, oh, we may have an answer in 3 days to 5 days, then I would wait till that 5th day. And when you do follow up, I would just make it like very brief, nothing very long again, just basically saying like, hey, just wanted to reiterate my excitement for the role. Appreciate everyone's time. If you have any updates, I'd love to hear about them, right? So, yeah.
And this is actually speaking to a really good question that another student had, like, what's the difference between like a thank you note, right? Like, thank you for your interview, and then follow up, right? And so maybe like the timing of that thank you note post interview that you just had, and then the follow up piece, like what would be the difference? And maybe the timing differentiation there. Aaliyah, maybe I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, I think the thank you note placed pretty immediately after the interview process, when you're still fresh in the person's mind and you still have a little bit of momentum to potentially sort of continue to sort of add to the experience that the individual had with you. So I'd say within a day, 2 at max for the follow-up pertaining to the thank you note. And then I agree completely with what Emily shared, listening in and asking, actually proactively asking if the recruiter doesn't share with you when you can expect to hear back. certainly let that time lapse, and then maybe the next day, following up, because at that point it's a fair ask, right? There's an expectation set that you would hear back in 5 days, and if you haven't, then it's fair to follow up. And again, just to reiterate what Emily said, just a very quick, positively phrased message that, again, I appreciate your time. I'm still very interested in the role. Would love an update, or, please let me know when I can expect to hear back from you. So yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And two, I mean, I would say this kind of go, the other thing to consider too in that follow-up, this is less related to sort of how when you follow up, but also things to consider. Again, time sort of stands still when you're waiting to hear, right? But on the recruiter's end, things are moving very fast, right? And you never know what the delay might be, right? The person who has to approve your offer could be on vacation for a couple of days, or, there could be some interviews final interviews that are occurring, and all of those need to have happened before final decisions are made. So there's all kinds of different things that can affect that timeline. And so again, some of it is just really sort of, talking yourself into being patient, along with following up, well-placed follow-up, but also being patient and understanding that there's a lot of factors that could go into the delay. It's not, I guess ultimately the summary is don't take that personally, but again, it's fair to follow up if there's been an expectation set, or if there wasn't an expectation set and let's say you forgot to ask, then I would say give it a week, right? And then that's kind of my personal rule of thumb, or what I would appreciate in terms of, just sort of the time, grace before that follow-up.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think that's answering a little bit of what Nicole wrote in our Q&A, just around, is it appropriate to ask at the end of an interview next steps? And I think the vibe that we're getting is, yes, that's appropriate. So you have a timeline to kind of coordinate your follow-up, and there's expectations set there.
Yeah. And just to jump in, I mean, a good recruiter is going to share that with you proactively, right? So they kind of owe you that information as a recruiter. Again, this is just a personal opinion, but so therefore, yes, if not, then I think it's quite appropriate to ask. Yes.
And this is taking it a step further. Avery asked, if an interview involves multiple people at once, should I follow up with separate emails per person or one message with all interviewers included? And I think I've been on the receiving end of both ends of those, but I'll maybe pass it to you, Adrian and Zainab, on kind of your perspectives on that.
I would say, I would say all inclusive is okay, unless you felt as though there was a connection made with one of the candidates, and then you wouldn't want to send it to the group and then that candidate individually. So go one way or the other, but there should, if you're doing them individually, it should be to capitalize on an opportunity to connect with them individually by way of something that was specific to them, or something they said, or just some sort of level of connection by way of the interview. So.
Absolutely.
Add to that, I guess I believe that quality is over quantity. So if you build that kind of connection with one of the interviewers, just try to hone on that and lean into that connection that you built and make it as personal as possible, because if you stand out for that interviewer, they can still vouch for you. So treat it as a power of or strength that you can leverage for your own benefit.
That's great. We have a question. Oh, no, go ahead.
Sorry, Erin, I just wanted to add to that if you interview with a panel, the decision making is likely going to happen as a group. So being sure to capitalize, I'll say, on that connection certainly does give you an advocate for yourself at the table when that group comes back together for decision-making purposes. So that was a good call out.
And we have a question in the Q&A around preferred methods of contact, right? So there may be some hiring managers or recruiter that prefer email or LinkedIn. Is it appropriate to ask them or interviewers and that if we don't have that information prior? Maybe hand it over to you, Emily.
Yeah, it's definitely appropriate to ask. I would always like lean on emails first, though, by the way, unless you've asked like, hey, can I connect with you on LinkedIn? What I would not do is like try to find their Instagram or Facebook or any other social media, because that does happen. So I would avoid that and really, focus on email or ask, hey, like, do you mind if I connect with you on LinkedIn so we can stay in touch?
There was actually something in the chat that I saw, Emily Grove, you wrote just being mindful of the timing of your interview. I'm wondering how much on the receiving and the recruiting side, we actually look at that. If it's an email sent at 3 in the morning versus 3 in the afternoon, like how does that, from a recruiting perspective, like how does that land, or does that hold any weight in some decision making? So feel free, anyone, to kind of come off of mute and share reflections.
I have stuff to say, but yeah, Aaliyah, please go. Please go.
I was going to say, not so much for me. I think everybody has their own schedules and boundaries in terms of when they're logging in and when they're accepting emails. So if someone's sending it at 3 in the morning, I won't get it until, 9 or so the next morning, and that's fine. With again, personal preference. I think some of it is as well, but yeah, that I don't think that is going to sort of make or break. Or would be a sort of major, etiquette faux pas if you're sending a message at a time when someone else typically wouldn't be logged in.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Everybody has different things going on in their lives, and maybe, what works for them is to email you at 3 a.m. and nobody should be judged for that at the end of the day, right? And certain companies, you'll learn as you go through the process, also have that view on the way that they work in their culture. Like, I know our company and a couple others like GitLab, et cetera, like it's very much like they care about outcomes, not specific, like the hours that you work from 9 to 5 or whatever it is. It's like you get your stuff done when you can, make your meetings, of course. But yeah, so I would just say really do what's best for you in that aspect.
We also know we're working with students too. So we know student schedules are very different from ours as well. So.
And I think to what Emily clarified in the chat too, it's more about being at the top of your inbox, right? Like it may get buried and maybe automated things or sends. And so just, kind of being mindful of maybe the time zone of yourself and on the recruiting end, but life happens.
So Erin, if I may, just to add to that, in the technology space, we can sometimes become the city that never sleeps, right? And so I think the danger in sending something late, super late night or the middle of the night, you have the potential for that person to be online. And if they read it during that time, it could, they can maybe not lend as much attention to it, or it fall off the radar. So while it wouldn't be anything that would create anyone to have any judgments, pass judgment or anything, there is always the opportunity to use your technology and the great features that are associated to most emails and simply schedule it for, maybe a 7:30, 8 a.m. Type of time that would, in accordance to their time zone, if you're aware at it, that would be a nice, top of the inbox, ready to be read morning email for that interviewer.
Yes.
Last one. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Particularly if you are talking about like 2 in the morning on Saturday, or, that then you're, Friday night, Saturday, then you're talking about, a couple days past before that Monday morning. So great points. I agree.
I think even beyond, right, in the workplace too, I'm very mindful of that. I have small children and sometimes I work past 10 o'clock and I don't want my team to think that they need to read an email at 11 p.m., right? So that schedule send comes in handy. I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I'm thinking more so, and Emily from Girls Who Could had this question. Is it appropriate to ask for feedback? And this is if you've had kind of the interview. I'm really curious, maybe post interview, immediate, just for feedback, but also maybe if you don't get the job, right, and kind of you're not moving forward in the interview process, asking for feedback about your answers or performance, like how does that feel, and is that appropriate? Maybe
I will
Zainab.
jump in and, sorry, Zainab.
I think it might depend on the company itself in this case, because I've had some of the big companies that I interviewed for, they were not allowed to provide me with feedback because it was confidential and they were not allowed to share. However, if you interview with startups or smaller companies and you have a let's say a more personal relationship with a recruiter, you can get feedback. So I remember receiving written feedback as well. So it doesn't hurt to ask. Make sure you ask, and whether it's yes or no, you'll still get your answer. So I think Aliyah had something to add to that.
Yes, agreed. I don't believe it's inappropriate to ask, but just be prepared that some companies have a policy not to provide interview feedback for legal reasons. Deloitte being one of them. We're an accounting firm, so we're, conservative when it comes to legal risk, for example. So I think, generally there's a wide spectrum of answers that you'll get, but I don't think it's inappropriate to ask. And you may just get lucky and strike a good rapport with an interviewer or your recruiter, and that person may be personally willing to share tidbits of information with you as well. So again, completely appropriate to ask, but just be prepared that you might not get a formal answer.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Adrian. Okay. Yeah, I +1 to that, absolutely. And I think also it depends how you ask. I've worked at companies that, the legal ramifications were much higher. And then at startups where if somebody just says like, I had a really great time, but I understand it didn't work out, but like, I want to get better because I'm interviewing at other places. Is there anything you can do to just kind of help me get to that next step or whatever it is, right? Like, I find that when people ask that way, where it's like a learning of like, I want to get better for my other interviews. You kind of, when you're a recruiter, you kind of understand some people ask that way, and then it's like, no, like, what did I do wrong? Because I thought that this would be like the role for me, right? So you just kind of gauge. So I think it's all on how you ask as well.
Absolutely. Adrian, anything to add?
It's not a whole lot different. I was just gonna say maintain emotional intelligence when you're asking, and that can definitely improve the chances on the organization being willing to engage. And it really just falls under the purview of nothing beats a failure but a try. The organization will either deny the feedback or give you some feedback that, as Emily said, really helps you as you progress through the additional interviewing opportunities.
We have a question in Q&A, and this I think relates a little bit, Zainab, to what you were talking about in terms of maintaining relationships with the person who interviewed you or the recruiter. We have a question in the chat. How do you suggest maintaining a connection with a recruiter, even if you don't accept an offer or you don't move along in the interview process? I really like that question. And Zainab, I don't know if you have any kind of like personal experience of, maintaining a relationship with one of the folks who kind of interviewed you along in the interview process, but that's for you. You had the job, but maybe how do folks kind of maintain that connection even if they don't necessarily get the job? And is that appropriate?
I think always following up. In one mentor that I had said, you have to follow up even New Year's, Christmas. You can just send these small notes and emails after these things happen, like after the interview you were rejected or you didn't accept the offer. You can always reach out and keep that connection alive with reaching out in these occasions, so you can keep the relationship alive with the interviewer or the recruiter. In my experience, it was quite different. It wasn't a job application, but it was more of a mentorship with Google in a program that happened, and I ended up following up with my mentor that I had from there, and we kept meeting almost like every 3 months, and he would assist me, and then he ended up being my mentor and for my thesis and my undergrad, and it was voluntarily done. So people are willing to help if you just know how to maintain the relationship and know how to follow up. And I guess building that connection, in the beginning where you both have that spark where you're interested in the same thing, or you just have that, I don't know, very common things that happen or you show a lot of interest in what they do. I think that can help a lot.
Yeah, that's great. And how do we feel, a follow-up question to this, and anyone can come off of mute. How do y'all feel about, or thoughts on connecting and following with folks outside of email, but connecting on LinkedIn, right? Is that something that you maybe ask in the interview, or if you have interviewees that find you on LinkedIn and friend you or kind of add you as a connection, kind of what are some of your thoughts on that, kind of maintaining that, that connection, that relationship with a recruiter? Aaliyah, maybe I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, so I think because LinkedIn is a professional social media outlet, it's completely appropriate to send a request. Again, a brief, well-placed, professional request to connect. And that person will, accept or not accept your request, and it might be based on their preferences, but I think it's completely appropriate to send. Again, I would just be prepared that not everyone is on the same level in terms of their social media presence and activity. So I'm probably one who is, guilty of not being on LinkedIn on a daily basis. And so again, I sometimes log into LinkedIn and see that someone sent me a message quite some time ago, right? Just because I live in email and sort of in that, email and instant messaging. And so I say it's completely appropriate, but just understand that people have different sort of preferences and levels of activity within. So again, don't take it personally. Perhaps if someone doesn't accept your request, it may just be that they're not often present online, or they'll accept your request once they do log in. But yeah, I think it's completely appropriate given that LinkedIn is utilized for professional purposes primarily.
Yeah.
And I
And
know
you could, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Emily.
You could also leave a note on the LinkedIn connection. Like there's an option to send a note with it. So you could just say like, it was great meeting you during this interview, or something very brief.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I know the focus of our conversation has primarily been on like post-interview etiquette, but we do have a question from Emily in the chat just around post-application etiquette. And so Zainab, I know you talked a little bit about kind of your mentor for the program that you had, but any kind of differences or similarities for like applying into a program, whether that's kind of an internship, a summer program, and any kind of etiquette considerations there?
So when you apply, you don't really have any emails of the recruiters yet. So post application, when you first apply with the resume scanning and everything, you might not have the ability to follow up or just send an email. However, if you are referred, I think it would be a great idea to follow up with whoever referred you to that position and thank them, and also follow up regarding the progress of the application, because they receive updates regarding your applications, so you can at least find out how well you've done on the resume scanning process and everything. So, but in the beginning of the application process, you might not have the ability to do that, unfortunately. So save all the efforts for post-interview.
To piggyback off of that, actually, too, in addition to, someone who might have referred you for a position, to kind of stay on the LinkedIn topic for a minute, another approach or possibility is for you to seek out individuals on LinkedIn who work for that particular company and who have something else common in your background. So one of my favorites is, Duke graduates, right? If someone reaches out to me and says, hey, I saw your LinkedIn profile, I see you're a Duke Fuqua School of Business graduate, I've applied for a role at Deloitte, would you be willing to speak with me for 10 or 15 minutes about, opportunities at Deloitte? I'm going to say yes every single time, because, one, I love talking about opportunities at Deloitte. Two, the person, sort of took the time and initiative to reach out. And three, importantly, we share something in common and have a, sort of commonality in our background. So that's something else. And again, you're not going to get 100% response rate from the individuals who you reach out on on LinkedIn. But again, you don't try, you don't know. So I think, mining LinkedIn for connections of that sort and requesting connections, even if it's kind of a cold call type of outreach, can work as well.
Yeah, that speaks to the personalized aspect too. I think I'm always going to be a sucker for folks that we have the same alma mater, right? And a fellow alum that's applying, into Girls Who Code or a partnering company that resonates with me a lot.
Yeah.
We don't have any more questions in the Q&A, but please, I think we have time for a few more. But one question is around, and let me find it because this was a really great question that Emily had posed. So let's say that you actually get another offer. So in that kind of waiting period to hear back on next steps, final interviews, you get another offer and you accept it. How do you communicate that to the first company or the other company that you've been interviewing with? Like how does that communication kind of work in terms of like you have another counter offer or you have something else kind of in the works? How should that communication be? Maybe I'll pass it to you, Emily. I see the thinking face, and maybe I made that up.
I mean, I would say like obviously give the same respect that you would want, and throughout the process, hopefully your recruiter's asking you where you are in your stage as well. But I think that communication should be there on both ends. And so I would recommend, if it's not, when you get to a final interview, you can say, I'm anticipating an offer. I don't know my timeline. I'll let you know. If you do end up getting an offer, it depends if you're really interested in this other role or not, right? If you're not and you just want to accept, then you just let them know, hey, unfortunately, I'm no longer available. I got another offer. I appreciate your time and really, be gracious about that. If you are still interested, I would just let them know, hey, I have received another offer. This is how much time I have to make the decision, which that's also negotiable, by the way. A lot of people don't know that. You can ask for more time if you need more time to make your decision. But yeah, and then I would let them know, I have this amount of time. So I just am kind of wondering where things are at. And then it's up to them to make a decision. They either move forward or they don't at that time, because now they know they have a time limit. So
yeah, that's a great piece too. And like a distinction, like if you were really interested in that first company, right? Like without sounding like you're giving ultimatums in some ways, but being just really honest with your timeline, right? For decision making.
totally.
So Erin, one thing I'll add to that is I think people sometimes want a company to think that they love them so much that they're putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. One thing that can help with that is if you are actively interviewing, you can also make that known at the time of your interview as well. I'm very interested in your company. Your values align with my values. The position sounds as though it's an excellent fit. I do want to make you aware that I am actively interviewing with other organizations, and so it creates, especially when you're a strong candidate, it creates a sense of urgency for the organization if they are very interested in you, because they don't want you to get away. So don't be hesitant, to communicate that as a part of your interview process as well, so that you don't get away, and go through the whole negotiation, and, they can just come, straight out the gate and send you that offer, because we do make immediate decisions. We don't, so.
And I would just add to, just in general, to be transparent, I think is appreciated, right? Just as you expect, we talked a lot about, hearing back from companies and sort of knowing what's going on their end. And it's the same the other way around too. I know when I was a recruiter and would extend offers to candidates, I would actually ask, are you considering any other offers? Are you, considering offers outside of consulting? There were, nice ways to ask the candidate as well, sort of what they have going on as a candidate. I'd be transparent just so that, people know where you stand and they understand that you're very interested, but you also have other options. So that motivates them to do the same, and then sometimes to move your process along if needed, if they really want you. So.
Yeah, you're not going to lose an opportunity because you're interviewing elsewhere. So don't be scared of that if that is something that you would ever be scared of.
Yeah.
And Emily, you did mention though, like you can ask for more time. Like once let's say you got an offer from a company that is lower on your priority list, like how much time could you realistically ask for? Like what's the appropriate amount of extension maybe to make that decision or to wait to hear back from another company?
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to depend. It's on a couple things, right? Like how transparent you were at the beginning. So I'll give you an example. At one of the companies that I was at previously, there was a candidate that we interviewed, and she let me know right off the bat, my goal is to interview this month. I would like to make a decision within the first week of the next month, and I would like to start the month after, which would have meant that we would have had to wait a month for her to start. But she would need, if we got done with the interview time, she would need 2 to 3 weeks to make the decision or whatever that time was. And the recruiter should be communicating this with the hiring manager, so there's no concern there. So in that situation, everybody was aware of the situation. They loved her. They wanted to make her an offer. They did. Took her 2 to 3 weeks. She signed her offer and she started a month later. So be transparent, but it's going to depend on business urgency. It's going to depend where the company is at. They may be interviewing 5 or 6 people, and then, it may get to a point where if you need longer than 1 to 2 weeks and they've found somebody else they really like, they may have to have a hard conversation of like, you need to make your decision or we need to move forward. So I guess to answer more directly, I would ask for like probably no more than a week, like max 2, but you have to be prepared for them to say, we can only give you an extra 3 to 5 days.
And I'd say you also have to be prepared to, again, be transparent, to be able to share with them the context as to why you're asking for the extension. That would be much appreciated as well. And I'll say, if I think about our campus recruiting process, so for students who are actually on campus interviewing for either internships or full-time roles, in that situation, we typically have a little bit more leeway because we're interviewing so far out from when students are actually going to start. So we're interviewing in August, September for students we know are not going to start until the next June or July. So typically we're going to have just a general rule of thumb, so sort of policy around, okay, we can give a week or we can give 2 weeks, but we're not going to give 2 months. But there tends to be more flexibility of, when you're in a campus process and you're still a student expecting to start many months out. So that's something to consider for our students on the line as well.
We just got like rapid fire in the Q&A, but we can connect and we have all the panelists linked in. A lot of them are around like, are there any jobs? Do you hire non-programmers? And so we will share LinkedIn profiles in the chat in a little bit for y'all to follow up. But my last kind of closing question, and let's say you don't get the job, right? How do candidates handle rejection gracefully, but still maintaining that positive and professional kind of demeanor, potentially still using that relationship to leverage in the future, just for future opportunities. So if we can kind of close out with like handling, I don't like to call it rejection, but, not moving forward with that particular position. So Zainab, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think understanding that the hiring process is not personal and any rejection is not about you as an individual. The hiring process is very pragmatic. It doesn't account for your feelings or your ideas or your opinions about the company. It's just very pragmatic. So it's not personal. It's not about you. A lot of details go into the hiring process and choosing someone for the position. So don't take it personally and take it as an opportunity to learn If you get the feedback, just try to build on that and improve. And also, I think something that helped me so much is shifting the mindset from if I didn't get this position, it might not be for me. I have something else meant for me and it will find me. And it's a good thing. If you get rejected, it's a good thing because something bigger is waiting for you. And just hone on that and keep working. And you're gonna fail. Everyone did. Everyone got rejected. And it's just part of the process. Just be patient and take it with grace and give yourself some grace and love and keep working hard.
Rejection is redirection. Every no is just practice for the one yes. I love these like words of affirmation. This is incredible. Anyone else on the call though? How do we handle rejection gracefully? Any tips there?
Go ahead. Adrian, I saw you on mute.
You're like me. We use Teams, and I see that little blue circle. I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
right.
say something. But just as they say, there's opportunity in opposition. There's opportunity in rejection. You've increased your network. You've met individuals at the organization that you may not have known before. You can still be mindful of the fact that you may not have been a good fit for that position, but you may be a good fit for another position. And you can there's no harm in saying, if you know of anyone that could benefit from the skills that I do have, despite not being the most qualified candidate for position X, please feel free to refer me. And just maintain I'm really big on emotional intelligence. Just maintain your emotional intelligence in your response. And similar to what Zeynep mentioned, there's I just believe that what's yours is assigned to you, and no one else is going to get it. So it's really a game of patience and having a positive outlook and just being consistent in pursuit of what is out there for you.
Yeah. I have rejected people that I've ended up hiring at the same company or maybe even other companies. Excuse me. And I think, speaking about emotional intelligence, people really do show their true colors during times that could be considered stressful, this being one of them, right? So I'd recommend just kind of taking in whatever the recruiter says, thanking them for their time, letting them know you'd still be interested in the future if you would, of course. And then, like we've talked about, ask them if it's okay to connect on LinkedIn. Feel free to check in on occasion. But yeah, definitely +1 to a lot of what's been already said.
Yeah, ditto. It stings. I just want to acknowledge that rejection or not getting a role that you've applied for does sting, right? So maybe give yourself time to accept that feeling and feel that way. But then ultimately to know that if that opportunity did not come through for you, then there's likely something that's a better fit for you. There's likely something that's better. Just personally, can honestly say every time I've applied for or interviewed for a position that I did not get, eventually where I did land was the perfect place for me, including my current role. So I'd say, take the sting. I have a career coach in the past that would say, spend a day in Pity City, but not longer than that, and then move on and understand that there's a better opportunity that's likely the right one for you.
I love that. We've gotta take this chat, Emily. The Pity City, all of these great affirmations. I love that. But we're gonna wrap up our conversation. I know we're at time. If folks can just stay on one more minute, I have a few kind of closing announcements, and you've seen some of the notes in the chat. But we would love to hear from you. So there is a QR code, I believe we're either gonna put on the screen, but if not, it's already there. Perfect. If you all can kind of QR code, scan that, and let us know how this event went, and really helps us to plan future events. We also have all of our panelists' LinkedIn profiles. So the art of the follow-up, art of following up with our panelists and asking all those questions. You can probably also go to their respective company sites if there are any jobs available. But if we can all kind of in the chat, just thank our panelists for their time, the gift of their time tonight, please do so. We really appreciate all of you tuning into our final workshop of our Hiring Summit workshop series. So that is a wrap. We hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoon and evening. And thank you so much. Have a great one, everyone.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Please fill out
Thank
that
you.
survey.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Adrienne, Emily, Zainab. It was such a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much.
Have a great night.